If you're watching, stop for the next 15 seconds because I said, don't cry yet. You'll need those tears when I take your pride and half of your money. And what I did after changed both our lives forever. I didn't scream. I didn't throw dishes. I smiled, packed a bag, and let the quiet do the rest. My name is Nina. I'm 35, a school counselor who loves secondhand books and rainy afternoons. For 10 years, I lived with Caleb, 38, a polished sales director who loved recognition more than he loved home. We met when I was fresh out of college. He was the man everyone wanted at their table, confident, well-dressed, and always ready with a story. I fell in love with his bright laugh and his promises that we'd build a future together. For years, I played my part. Trade lunches for late-night meetings, small birthday surprises for his big office wins, and my patience for his ambition. I juggled our bills, ran the household, and attended every networking event like a quiet shadow at his side. When we argued about money, he branded my caution as lack of vision. When I asked for partnership, in decisions, in respect, he told me to trust him. He knew how to make things grow. The night he said it, the line that cut deeper than anything before began like any other. He'd come home from a conference with a trophy and a grin so wide it made our living room look small. He unpacked stories of praise, of handshakes and media mentions. I congratulated him with tea and a slice of cake. Then he complained about my suggestion to hold back on an unnecessary renovation. He laughed at my worry. "You're always so dramatic about pennies," he said, voice warm with condescension. "Don't cry yet. You'll need those tears when I take your pride and half of your money." It was said as a joke to his colleagues on the phone, a performance. But it landed like a verdict on me. For the first time, I didn't react. Instead, I watched him walk around the house, the man I knew folding himself into a version esteemed by trophies and applause. I made my choice in that silence. Over the next few weeks, I moved like a careful strategist disguised as a loving wife. I kept making dinners, offered him advice on his presentations, and listened when he recounted praise. On the surface, I was the same Nina, calm, supportive, present. Underneath, I was taking notes and closing chapters. Years earlier, when my grandmother passed, she'd left me an old checking account and a box of documents, a small inheritance, and a deed to a tiny rental property she'd once owned. In the rush of life, I'd never mentioned it. Caleb assumed I had nothing of consequence. That assumption became my shield. Quietly, I consolidated my freelance counseling income into separate accounts, finalized a pending grant for a community program I'd been developing, and met with a lawyer to structure protections for the work I intended to build. No confrontation, no spectacle, just preparation. When I finally moved, I gave him what he expected, a theatrical sadness and a practiced apology for not being more supportive. He reveled in his moment of perceived victory, the man who thought he'd proved his power. Then, 2 weeks later, I filed for separation and handed him a list of documents that made his bravado look thin under legal light. The deed to the rental property, contracts showing my independent income, and clear records proving many of the shared expenses had been paid from accounts he never saw. The quiet ledger I'd kept for myself spoke louder than his bravado. He tried to bluff. He threatened publicity. He threatened reputational damage at his company. He attempted to depict me as unstable to mutual friends, but facts aren't swayed by threats. When the mediator reviewed the documents, the house we'd once considered ours resolved into something far simpler. A fair settlement, yes, but one that respected the work I had quietly done for years. People were surprised to learn the truth. I had never been a passive partner. I had been the one steadying the ship while he chased lights. What followed wasn't a triumphant parade. I rented a modest apartment, opened a small counseling practice focused on family resilience, and took the rental property from my grandmother's folder and restored it into a place that provided steady income. At night, I read those dusty books I loved again. I taught workshops. Children I'd supported in school found me a safe ear. Neighbors brought me soup when we painted the old house. Gratitude replaced the hollow applause I'd once craved. Caleb's world, on the other hand, crumbled in ways his trophies couldn't patch. Without the comfortable assumption that he held all the strings, people in his circle noticed the gap between his words and his deeds. The renovations he'd bragged about stalled. Sponsors at his company asked awkward questions. He called once, voice small, begging for a meeting to fix things. I met him at a cafe, and he looked smaller than when I'd married him, no awards in hand, only the realization that charm does not equate to responsibility. I didn't dance in his downfall. I didn't post vindictive messages or humiliate him to friends. My victory was quieter. Mornings when I could sip my tea without pretending to admire a man who never respected me. The client who thanked me for helping their family rebuild after crisis. The rent checks that arrived steady each month. Proof that my work mattered. The pride he threatened to take was returned to me, stitch by stitch, in a life I reclaimed. If you watched closely, you'd see that revenge wasn't about taking his money. It was about taking back my life and refusing to be a prop in someone else's story. He had promised tears would help him win. Instead, my tears fertilized the ground I'd stand on. In the end, when he realized that the woman he expected to crumble had built something real, he did what many do when faced with quiet strength. He vanished into excuses and pride. If you liked the video, please subscribe and turn on notifications.